Welcome to the Superhumanized podcast. I'm your host, Ariane Summer, and today we're embarking on a journey that feels deeply personal to me, one that bridges my childhood in New Delhi, India, with the cutting-edge science of human optimization. From ages 4 to 8, I lived in India, where I was first exposed to yoga, Ayurveda, and a way of seeing the body not as a machine, but as an intelligent, conscious system and constant dialogue with nature. Those early impressions planted seeds in me and have shaped my entire approach to health and human potential. Today, I'm honored to welcome someone who has spent over 40 years building bridges between that ancient Ayurvedic wisdom and modern science, Dr. John Douillard. As a chiropractor, certified Ayurvedic practitioner, and founder of lifespa.com, Dr. John has worked alongside Deepak Chopra, trained medical doctors in Ayurvedic medicine, and served as director of player development for the NBA's Brooklyn Nets, where he was the first in the West to apply Ayurvedic principles to elite athletic performance. He's the author of 7 books, including the bestsellers Eat Wheat and Body, Mind, and Sport. And his work explores some of the most fascinating intersections I can imagine: quantum physics and consciousness, the gut-brain axis, seasonal microbiomes, and how practices like nose breathing can literally change our nervous system's relationship to stress. This conversation is going to stretch us intellectually, spiritually, and practically. So wherever you are right now, take a deep breath through your nose and let's dive in.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
John, welcome to the Superhumanized podcast. It is really a pleasure to connect with you.
It's great to be here, Ayane. Thank you.
Absolutely. And something that really fascinates me about pioneers in a field is what catalyzed their journey. And in your case, you were a triathlete, a sports medicine chiropractor before you took a really deep dive into Ayurveda. And that's not necessarily the typical path. What was the movement or perhaps the experience that made you realize that ancient Ayurvedic wisdom has answers that modern medicine or modern sports medicine is missing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was studying actually Chinese acupuncture at the time when I was in school, and I heard about the word Ayurveda, and I was like, wow, there's this like really ancient system in India I'd like to know. I went to a lecture to hear about it. It was in Santa Monica, actually. And afterwards, I went up to the guy. He was talking about yoga and breathing and meditation and Ayurveda. And I said, so I'm training for an Ironman, and I wonder what Ayurveda would say about doing an Ironman. And he was like, what is that? And I said, it's a 2.5-mile ocean swim, a 112-mile bike, a 26-mile run. And he looked at me and he said, why do you do that? And I had never been asked that question before, so I didn't really have an answer. And I was just humming and hawing. And he goes, do you meditate? And I said, yes, I do meditate. And he goes, do you sleep when you meditate? And I go, deeply. I get this knocked out, drag sleep. It's fantastic. It's super refreshing. I love it. And he said, sleep is different than meditation. Meditation is being resting and alert at the same time. Sleep is you're pretty much conked out, which I was. And he said, you're exhausted and you're probably doing way too much. And that's why you're sleeping in your meditation. It's not a clear experience. And I was like, wow. He says, does that mean if I could not fall asleep when I meditate, I could do all this exercise and it'd be okay? And he was like, yeah, yes, you could do that if you wanted to. Anyway, for me, that was my marching orders. I started meditating more, training less. I started going to weekend meditation retreats in Santa Monica, believe it. And then I did that once a month, like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just meditate, yoga, breathe, meditate all day. Then I went on a 2-week retreat and did that. And when I came back from that, I was just shot out of this runner's high canyon. I had this experience, canyon, where I was in this zone for 3 months. I started competing at a significantly higher level, winning medals, competing at a really high level. A lot of my friends, some of them started meditating. Many of them thought I was on steroids. They didn't know what was going on, but I was clearly different. And that zone experience overflowed into my clinical practice as well. I was doing my internship at that time. And I had this bandwidth that I had for 3 months that I didn't have prior and haven't really had really even since in that kind of a way, where I was just able, my capacity, my bandwidth, my ability to handle stuff, stress, I could compete at a much higher level, and then it disappeared. And that's when I was like, I want that back. I need to figure out what that was because it was amazing. And I started reading about the runner's high, read books like The Psychic Side of Sports and different books like that. Ended up having a chance to go to India for just a couple of months to try to learn Ayurveda back in 1986. And I ended up going there and being invited to stay permanently and learn Ayurveda. So I closed my practice. I had a practice in Boulder, Colorado. I closed it from a great distance on a very scratchy phone. Ended up just leaving everything and then started studying Ayurveda. That's where I met Deepak Chopra. He was training there as well. He was opening up a center. He asked me to come back and co-direct it with him, which I did. And that's when I started training medical doctors, which I really needed to bring in the modern science. And that's what I do today after all those years, is put the ancient wisdom together, which is time-tested, thousands of years, still being practiced today, in modern science. And I think if you have science alone, you really can prove whatever diet you want. Coffee can be good or bad. You can prove whatever it wants depending on who's doing the study. But we have something been around for thousands of years, still here today. And you have modern science. I feel like that's a really safe place for us to start. We're trying to dissect what's real or not real in the world of health and fads and trends that are just coming and going.
Yes, and I love that you combine this rich school of ancient wisdom that has been applied for thousands of years with modern science. And we're just at such an incredible juncture right now with everything that's possible, including with AI and science, etc. The whole other rabbit hole. But as you mentioned, you co-direct the Deepak Chopra Center, and you also train medical doctors. And that was in the 80s and early 90s. It must have felt quite revolutionary in Western medicine. And I'm curious, what was the biggest resistance or skepticism you encountered from the medical establishment, and how did you navigate that? Because I think many of us in the wellness space still face this tension, right, between ancient wisdom and institutional acceptance.
I've been around I don't feel like I'm that old, but I've been around for doing this for about 40 years now. And when I first started in practice teaching medical doctors, that's why I brought the science into it. I had to speak their language, which was a gift in hindsight. And that's when I wrote my first book, Body, Mind, and Sport, which is all about nose breathing versus mouth breathing exercise. I learned the nose breathing thing when I was in India, came back and did research on it and published studies on it. And I would talk to medical doctors and comparative anatomists and pulmonologists and find out about, okay, what's the difference between nose breathing and mouth breathing? And everybody I talked to, no matter who I spoke to, said there was absolutely no difference whatsoever. And we have 5 lobes of the lungs. We really only need 2 of them. And we don't really need the other 3. And it just made zero sense to me. And it's just really, what I really learned from that was that the medical profession really looks through blinders. It only sees what it wants to see. And even in what they see can be incredibly life-changing and life-saving for people, but they haven't opened the door to look at the whole picture, to understand the body as a whole, to understand the intelligence of the whole, that all the different parts of the body are functioning as one. And they couldn't even see that the lungs had 5 lobes, and that was critically important, all 5 lobes, which we now know today through studies. But back then, you would think it was still modern science. It wasn't like primitive times. It was the late 80s and early 90s. And there was just no recognition of anything outside the box. And that really is frustrating, I think, for now. I think the word is out. People are frustrated with Western medicine because they don't think of the body as a whole unit that has to work in harmony with itself. They just look at the parts and fix parts. And now we have forever medicines. You get on a drug, you never get off of it. Those kind of things, even when I was starting out, that was not the case. If you got on a medication, you got better and then you got off. And now you never get off of them. And that's the big problem in our culture, which is why we do what we do. We try to help people understand, like the ancient wisdom, like in Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, it was all about getting the body to heal itself, right? And then naturopathic medicine came along, and that was about doing the job for the body, but doing it in a natural way. If we can't help the body do it itself, we're going to do is some natural hormone or some laxative or digestive enzyme. We're going to do it for you, but naturally. And then, of course, Western medicine is going to do it for you any way possible. And when you look at all those, I look at those as three medical buffets, but where we should be starting is how can I get my body to do the job? How can I live in harmony with nature, circadian rhythms, seasonal eating, the right bugs from the right season in our gut to give us the right benefit to antidote the extreme of that season. We need immunity in the winter. The bugs in the fall provide that from the food we eat, provide boosted immunity during the winter months we need it the most. We decongest in the spring.
Of your work, that's so fascinating. And I want to do a really surgical deep dive into those. You mentioned so many interesting things that a little bit further in the conversation, I want to really focus on, from the nose breathing to the cyclical nature also of the microbes and how we can use them. You touched upon something that I think is really crucial also for us to understand, and that is in a broader view with regard to Ayurveda. When I was a child living in India, it wasn't presented as alternative medicine. It was just medicine, and it was woven into daily life from how you ate to how you slept. But here in the West, we tend to cherry pick practices without understanding the complete system, as you so aptly just said. Can you help us understand what Ayurveda actually is at its core? What's the foundational philosophy that everything else emerges from?
There's two definitions that I like to share. One is Ayurveda. Ayu is life. Veda is science. So it's the science of life. It was a deep study into nature, watching the seasons change and the birds migrate, and understanding that there were circadian rhythms that we are connected to as well. And living in harmony with those rhythms was 101, that you had to live a lifestyle in harmony and sync. And we're just now really beginning to understand that. So it was understanding the herbs that come out of the ground in different seasons and the microbes attached to them. All that made sense. And they understood. They talked about something called krimi, which were the invisible microbes. They talked about them 5,000 years ago in their textbooks. They couldn't see them, but they knew there was something invisible that was affecting gut health. And they even talked about not killing those krimi or those bacteria. They talked about changing the ecology and the environment of your gut. Again, something really we're just beginning to understand. So it's the science of diet and lifestyle, exercise and breathing and pranayama, yoga, all these things that really bring the body not only back into balance, but refining this body as an instrument to perceive subtle energy in ways that really no instrument can. And that brings us to the second definition of Ayurveda, which is Ayu is life and Veda is truth, which means never changes. So it's that part of us that never changes. And that's, we think in our culture that many of us believe that there's a spirit and we die, there's an afterlife and a soul and all that. But we don't really know that for sure until we die, and then we find out. Ayurveda was like, you can begin to thin that veil, refine your subtle perception, and actually have an experience of the part of us that never changes while we're here. And that means there was a whole world of spiritual understanding that was tied to the physical part of us. So it wasn't just fix your heartburn, you're done. It was like, yeah, let's fix your heartburn. Let's get this body back into balance. Let's refine it in such a way where it can actually perceive the joy, the love, the compassion, and the caring for others, and be beings at our full potential, as opposed to just living a healthy life. To live a long life, there wasn't, longevity was a huge part of Ayurveda, but it wasn't just for the numbers of years. It was that the last part of our life was when we had the ability, and this was a UCLA study showed that we have the ability to actually perceive subtle energy better as we get older than when we're younger. So it's when we get older, we want to find God before it's too late. But there's a hard wiring that allows us to actually do that, which is really cool because it opens the door to the fascinating world of the unseen. And that's such a big part of Ayurveda as well. And that's what I loved about it.
Yes, 100%, John. And to circle back to something you just mentioned, one of the aspects of Ayurveda that I find is most beautiful is this attunement to cycles, the daily, the seasonal, the lunar. And you've actually written about seasonal eating in the Three Seasons diet. But it's not only about eat what's local, there's something much deeper happening with our microbiome, with the seasonal microbes in the soil. Can you illuminate this for us? What wisdom is encoded in eating strawberries in June versus squash in November?
Yeah, it's really just boils down to the stuff we can't see, right? We can't see the microbes in the soil, but we have now really good Stanford science to show that the bugs in the soil change from one season to the next. Stanford also did research on the Hadza hunter-gatherer tribe still remaining, and they found that their bugs in their gut change from one season to the next, suggesting that ours should too. And they did a study also in New Mexico and Arizona, and they went into museums and they took the bugs out of mummies that, like Native American mummies that were 1,000 years old, and they were able to measure their microbiome. And there was such a level of massive diversity of the bugs in their gut compared to ours. Their conclusion was that this is, in fact, an extinction event, our lack of microbial diversity. So when you think about the foods we eat that are sprayed with pesticides and the bugs are gone, and those microbes help us make the enzymes to help us digest things like wheat and dairy and nuts and seeds and glyphosate. We have the capacity to break those things down, even heavy metals, except for the fact that we've broken down our digestion, and that leaves us way more vulnerable. So the seasonal eating is just the most logical diet, because that's what everybody on the planet did, whether they liked it or not. We had no choice. Now we have a choice. Well, so what I did with the seasonal eating guide is we just took grocery lists like this, and we just basically made a list of all the foods that are harvested in the summer, and you circle the foods on the list that you like and eat them. Or then we have a spring list and a winter list, which is a fall harvest for winter eating. There's 3 harvests in nature, so I call it the 3-season diet. One cycle in nature is resting, generally speaking. So you have a fall harvest for winter eating and a spring harvest and a summer harvest. All of them are quite different, but they really give us proof to the more extreme diets that are out there, like the no-carb diet. If you were on the planet living off the land, you would eat a no-carb diet in the spring because there is no pasta nor pizza coming out of the ground in the spring. You'd eat a high-protein, high-fat diet in the winter because there's nothing coming out of your garden. You eat a high-carbohydrate diet in the summer because that's when all the fruits and the vegetables, and a super high carb right before winter kicks in to really give us that boost of reserve fuel and insulation to make it through the winter. So it just makes sense that we should still be aligning our diet with eating more of those foods. And we take these grocery lists, just circle the ones you like. There's asterisk foods, which are the superfoods for that season if you want to get really into it. But it's easy. Just take the 3 lists, take it to the grocery store, eat more of those foods. Doesn't mean you have to only eat those foods. You just want to get the right amount, more of those foods in a medicinal way to get the right bugs in your gut for the right season. And that's a lot simpler than some of the extreme diets that are out there that always seem to get replaced with the diet that says, now it's okay to eat the food that the other diets told you couldn't eat. And we go down that road again and again.
Absolutely, John. And this makes so much sense and it's fascinating. And I'd love for you to walk us even a little bit deeper into this idea that, not just the idea, the fact that microbes in the soil change with the seasons, and that by eating seasonally, we're actually cycling our gut microbiome. And this feels like one of these concepts that's both ancient wisdom and cutting edge microbiology. Can you go deeper here? What happens in our inner ecosystem when we eat the same foods year round, essentially ignoring nature's rhythms? And what are the consequences we're seeing?
There's two things. There's the actual food chemistry, and then there's the microbes. And when you take us, humans, and you take us and our microbiome, and you take away the microbiome, we're a completely different person. There's the whole psychobiotic thing where our mood would change, our desires would change, even our occupation could change. So when you take the bugs away from the soil or the plants that we eat, the bugs that attach to the plants are called bacterial endophytes, which have been studied to show to support the immunity and the benefit, the longevity, and the potency of that plant. So there's a real synergy. Only certain bugs in the soil are attracted to the roots of certain plants. It's like a thing. They are attracted to them for a reason. And this is the incredible intelligence of nature. So when you eat that plant in its whole form, you're getting the nuts and the seeds that the squirrels are eating. And they know that they're higher fat and high protein. It's going to give them insulation during the winter months, which they're going to need. But it also gives them the microbes that support a microbiome to help them digest and deliver the fats and the proteins to give them that insulation and that reserve fuel that they so desperately need. And so it's that combination. And when you look at what nature did, which is just, of course, intelligent and beautiful, is that the harvest of nature is the antidote to the extreme of that season. So in the winter, when it's cold and dry, you're going to get meats and nuts and seeds and higher protein, higher fats to insulate you. In the spring, when it's rainy and muddy and allergy season and congestion, you're going to get no carbohydrate, no pasta, no congestive foods. It's going to be root vegetables and strawberries and some leafy greens, very austere, that scrub your villi and get rid of any excess mucus that is naturally increased during the spring months when the ground and earth is holding on to more water. We hold on to more water during that season, and nature's antidote is to give you things that are astringent, that suck up that water, or like dandelion roots that help you pee it out as a diuretic. And of course, in the summer, you have cooling fruits and vegetables that are the antidote to the heat of the season.
It's so logical, and most of us live so counter to that. I myself am guilty, especially when in California, you get your favorite foods, which are healthy, but they're not necessarily seasonal year round. And you have extensively written about the gut-brain connection, which is now becoming more mainstream. And you actually even take it further. And this is something that really fascinated me, John. You describe the brain as a digestive organ, and that's a profound reframe. Can you walk us through this concept? How does the mind digest experience in a way that's parallel to how our gut digests the food?
You could probably safely say there's three brains in the body. There's this brain and there's your heart, which is also got an incredible amount of neurons. And of course, the gut is literally called the second brain. And in Ayurveda, they talked about the seat of your entire nervous system was your gut. They didn't say the seat of the nervous system was the brain, which would have been the logical thing to say, because when you dissect something, you go, oh, that's got to be the thinking part in the head. They said, no, the thinking part is in the gut. How did they know that thousands of years ago? This is the part that kind of makes me go, we really need to just reel in some of the ancient wisdom, tie it together with the science for sure, but we can't just throw it away. It was too profound to know that the gut was the seat of the nervous system that long ago. It is critically important. And of course, I think what you're talking about is the brain has a lymphatic system, just like your gut has a lymphatic system. And the lion's share of your gut immunity is in the lymph around your belly. And that's 70% of your immune response. And we also have lymph in the brain, only recently discovered in Western medicine that Ayurveda talked about thousands of years ago, the brain's lymph and lymphatic systems, which dump 3 pounds of trash out of our head every year while we sleep. And studies now show that when you get congestion of the brain lymph, and this was found directly linked to long-haul COVID, because if you can't breathe in long-haul COVID, the number one pump of your brain lymphatic system and the lymph around your belly is your diaphragm. And when you can't breathe in COVID, that's going to be a problem. And recent research showed that 91% of athletes did not have a diaphragm relaxing and contracting fully. So really, none of us have good diaphragmatic function. Therefore, we don't have that good lymphatic pump. And that means that the pumping of the trash out of our head to the tune of 3 pounds per year while we're sleeping is going to get backed up here. And that's linked to anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, inflammation, infection, sleep issues, and autoimmune concerns, where the master computer doesn't know, which remember, your lymph is carrying your immune system. So if the master computer can't deliver a healthy immune response because everything is congested, it might send too many fire trucks or too few fire trucks to the immune event. And that can cause either a weakened immune response or an overzealous one. And now we have all these autoimmune concerns, or long haul COVID was linked to brain lymph congestion in the brain that was studied early on. And that's because we couldn't breathe. And so many things are linked to the diaphragm, which is such a critical important for the brain to be able to take in information, and for the brain to get rid of its trash, and for the gut to take in information, nutrition, and get rid of its trash. And where the rubber meets the road is our immune response, which we see dramatically compromised in so many ways. We didn't do well with COVID as a culture. And that's because we've been bubble wrapping our diet, just telling everybody, don't eat. And I understand if you don't feel good eating something, don't eat it, but you should look a little further and fix the underlying broken down digestive system that won't let you eat. Because it started out with, say, don't eat wheat and dairy. Okay, I can see that would be a good idea. And I did that when I was in my practice, when I first started in 1984. We took people off of dairy and wheat, and they got better. And then they get sick again. Then we take them off of something else, try to get off soy, and then the next thing. Now it's nuts and seeds and grains and legumes and beans and nitrates and oxalates and goitrogens and phytic acids and lectins and you name it. Don't eat it because they're hard to digest. And that's the real problem, is those hard to digest foods provide hormesis, which means they make us stronger. So we bubble wrap our diet, we became a vulnerable organism. And that's exactly what happened to us.
I love this phrase, stop bubble wrapping your diet, John. And someone in the biohacking and wellness space, I see this constantly, what you just described, people eliminating more and more foods and becoming afraid of gluten, dairy, lectins, you name it. But that's only something in your book, Eat Wheat. What you just said, this hyper restriction backfires. And that actually feels counterintuitive to a lot of people. But that's exactly it. It's hormesis. This is, of course, you can take it a little bit too far. If I'm in Paris and 6 out of 7 days, hormesis, I eat 5 croissants per day. But that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about you can absolutely follow healthy guidelines and what feels good to your body. At the same time, if you stay in, some people have conditions that make them live literally in what's called so-called bubbles, autoimmune issues, etc. But if you're not dealing with something like that, but just imagine as a regular human being, you'd sit in a room on purpose, you wouldn't expose yourself to anything, no people, no dust, nothing. And then you go outside into the real world. You won't be able to handle it anymore because you've bubble wrapped. I love this. And this is right in tune with the thought that digestive resilience is more important than dietary purity. So please outline it for us, because I get so many emails and messages often from people who feel like they're failing because they're not 100% adhering to whatever it is that they think they must follow.
Let me cite some science first so people can get it, because I think people say, oh no, I don't feel good when I eat those foods. How could they be good? And it's just simply because our digestion has gotten weaker. And of course, you don't feel good eating something. I'm not saying you should suffer, but we should ask the next question. Those foods are more of a canary in the coal mine than actually a real problem. So they did studies with wheat, people who were eating wheat and people who were gluten-free but didn't have to be. They didn't have celiac. And they noticed that the people who ate wheat had 4 times less mercury in their bloodstream than people who were gluten-free but didn't have to be. They had significantly more good bugs, less bad bugs, and more killer T cells than the folks who were gluten-free but didn't have to be. Even when people are celiac and they say, okay, don't eat wheat, the problem isn't solved. They don't ever tell you that part of the story. People with celiac have long-term nutritional deficiency issues that are not solved by just taking the wheat out of the diet. We didn't fix the real problem with celiac. Wheat wasn't the real problem. It's a major trigger, and of course they shouldn't eat it. But we need to continue to fix that coordinated effort of stomach acid and bioflow, pancreatic, duodenal enzymes, intestinal lining, the lymph around the gut, the health of the liver, the bioflow, All these things are critically important. And I wrote an article called The Digestive Health Quiz, where you just ask yourself all these questions about different aspects of digestion and find out where it's not working right, and then fix it with herbs and foods, simple things, and bring it back into balance. And I want to tell one more study before I let you comment on this, is that there was a study with Amish kids, and they have the lowest rates of asthma on the planet, Amish kids. And their genetic cousins who came from the same valley in Switzerland called the Hutterites came here, and they became modern, sterile, stainless steel farmers, everything's sterile. And those kids have the highest rates of asthma on the planet. It didn't, perfect like study group, same genetics, opposite problem. They measured the dust that the kids were running barefoot in the barns. They had cows as pets, and they were breathing all this barn dust. So they went and they measured the dust in the barn. They found it was the dust in the barn for these Amish kids that created a hormetic effect on the respiratory tract, that created an immune response against that ever getting asthma, versus the sterile farmers, right? Which they had the highest rates of asthma on the planet. So it's just such an important piece of the puzzle that we keep going down this road of just trying to make it simple. If you eat the standard American diet, you don't feel good, which most people will not feel good over time, then let's become a vegetarian and go into that. Or that if that doesn't work, which is sometimes challenging because vegetables are, they have chemicals on them the plant produces to ward off predators. So vegetables aren't easy to digest. And so then you become from a vegetarian to a vegan, from a vegan to a raw foodist, from a raw foodist to a carnivore where you're just eating a few vegetables and meat. We go down that road because we keep trying to find a solution to an underlying broken down digestion that none of these diets are going to fix unless you start to repair the upstream cause, which is that coordinated effort of all these digestive processes.
This is really fascinating, John. And to your point with the hormesis with the Amish kids, I did not grow up Amish, but I mentioned I grew up partially in India. The years before that, my first 3 years of my life, I actually spent in West Africa in Freetown, Sierra Leone. I grew up globally due to the job of my father. He was a diplomat for the German government. And I remember my parents used to tell the story. My mom used to be horrified initially that my little brother and I would play on the ground, wherever, whether it was outside or inside, and roll around. And my dad was like, no, let them. He did not have the kind of knowledge that you have, but he instinctually knows this is good. And both of us, knock on wood, we have had an incredible immune system all throughout our lives. I very rarely get sick. I do not have any allergies, et cetera, et cetera. And to your point, living sterile, it doesn't do us any good. And what you just shared about, I had no idea what you just shared about that people who are not celiac and don't have to not eat wheat, how actually what was it that there was lower levels of which heavy metal for people who did consume wheat regularly?
There was mercury. The wheat eaters had 4 times less mercury than the people who were gluten-free but didn't have to be. A significant study.
I'll have to look that up. And because I know so many who are working on eliminating heavy metals, especially on the one side. Yes, we're exposed to so much. On the other side, there's probably a lot of things we wouldn't have to fix if we went with the type of nutrition that is more in sync with nature and with the cycles. And talking about detoxing, there's something else I'm curious about, John. There's this idea of mental ama, the idea that unprocessed emotions create this kind of toxic buildup that gets stored in our fat cells. And as someone who's done a lot of inner work, that resonates deeply. I've seen how unresolved emotional patterns can literally manifest as inflammation or physical cravings. And I'd love your insight on this to switch gears a little bit from, let's say, food that's not becoming for us or toxicity buildup. What's happening physiologically when we store emotional toxicity? And even more importantly, how do we release it?
Studies show that the first 5 years of life create impressions that affect 95% of the things we think and say and do as adults, suggesting that we're somewhat unconscious, that most of our behaviors are based on those old, early impressions, which is hard even to fathom, but that's the science and that's been replicated. And so we are unconscious. And I think that's why traditional cultures had rites of passage, because when you're a kid, you're hardwired to just want mom and dad to like you and approve of you and give you things. So kids learn how to manipulate their parents really early on. If the kid didn't have a need for attention from the outside world, then the parents would have wandered into the jungle, got eaten by lions, there'd be no people here. So that need for approval is like part of our DNA. We need that. But then that rite of passage was like, now you're going to learn to stop needing love and appreciation and approval, and now you're going to start giving it because you're going to raise a family, and you got to now be the giver, not the getter. And so we unfortunately created a culture that continues to just get, and we have a culture that's completely based on approval from the outside world. They want love and appreciation and approval. I want to buy this, I want to buy that. And we keep getting this reward chemistry, which just completely detaches us from what's real. And that creates more patterns of behavior that get locked into how we handle stress and how we handle relationships, because it's all about me. So that's the Ayurvedic psychology piece. So Ayurveda has all these really cool tools to still the nervous system, create a level of self-awareness where you can become more clear about door number one, which is the door I always ride through whenever I just try to get everybody to like me and approve of me and appreciate me. I want to make a lot of money. It's America. And then, but as you become more self-aware, you realize that is a fleeting experience of satisfaction. And there's something more real that is indelible, that's a part of me that I can begin to have access to. They did a study with two groups of people giving a gift to other groups of people. And one group gave in a hedonistic way, where they gave with the expectation to get something in return. I want them to like me and approve of me and think I'm wonderful. I gave them this great gift. And the other group gave what's called eudaimonically, which is a way that they gave where they had no expectation to get anything in return. They just did it for the love of the giving. And the people that gave hedonistically, it had a negative effect on the genetic code of the people they were giving it to, so they could tell you were just all in it for you, and a negative effect on the giver, where when they gave eudaimonically, it had a positive effect epigenetically on the people you were giving it to. So we're subtle beings. We feel this stuff. We can sometimes tune into that. Sometimes we're just manipulated. We're duped by other people's abilities to manipulate you. But the reality is we can tell on a genetic code. It can be either good or bad when we're living from our heart, being willing to take a risk to be vulnerable, to be delicate, maybe even to be powerful. But that's the risk that we have to take. And when you still your nervous system, which is what yoga, breathing, meditation, pranayama, and even techniques to clean out the brain lymphatic system, which are incredible tools in Ayurveda to create a level of self-awareness. So you can see door number one, that old door with all 4 lanes with lights on it. I drive down like a Santa Monica freeway. It's just, that's the road I think on all day long. And then there's door number 2, which is the one less traveled, the one that we can begin to take action to free ourselves from those patterns. And that's the beauty of Ayurveda. It's all about first establishing being, a level of composure and calm, self-awareness, and then taking action based on that, not based on getting you to like me. You know what I mean? And that's such a super simple but super profound way to play the game of life, I call it. And that's something that allows us to free ourselves from patterns of behavior that we created as young children that served us as a kid, but clearly as adults oftentimes just aren't working anymore.
Yes, absolutely, John, and beautifully illuminated. Thank you for that. What you just shared, that really struck me. So when the gifts were given hedonistically, it epigenetically affected the receiver negatively and positively when it was given without any strings attached. How did this manifest epigenetically? I'm absolutely fascinated by this.
Yeah, the study didn't necessarily go into the great detail on that part of it. It was just that there were positive effects. And when you say positive effects epigenetically, there were measured things like your oxytocin production, which was a longevity hormone, would increase. The good bugs would proliferate. The bad bugs would disappear. The fight or flight nervous system would shift from being fight or flight to parasympathetic dominant, or at least a coexistence of the two opposite nervous systems, things like that. I'm trying to think of other things that were measured, but those are the things that were measured from that epigenetic perspective.
That's mind-boggling. And what pops up for me immediately is so this is let's say a one-time act, like receiving a gift. But if we transfer that to the types of relationships we may choose in our lives, romantic or friendships, and if this is a constant flow that we're living in where it's transactional, whether it's in our romantic relationships or friendships, and that's happening all of the time, the impact that must have, right?
Oh, yeah. When I give seminars for years and years, I would always ask people, I say, when we get into this subject, I'd say, how many of you love your spouse or husband or partner? Everybody raises their hand. Like, how many of you hold back loving your spouse or husband or partner? And almost everybody raises their hand. And then it's just like, why? Why, if you love them, why are you holding back loving them? That's what us humans do. We don't feel safe to love fully because they might not love me back. They might not take out the trash. They might not do what I need them to do. So therefore, I have to hold something back. And I've got many stories I can share with you about how when you finally do you and let something real out, as opposed to trying to manipulate them to be the way you think they need to be, how their world changes.
Yes. And how about holding back also, perhaps for reasons because you feel how you love may be too much or may not be acceptable within the norms of the particular culture you're currently living in, for example?
I think that that's the one thing that we protect the most is our most delicate feelings. And that love is right up against our consciousness and the delicate fields. And they're the creative intelligence, and love's sort of a bubble of that. But the mind quickly goes, well, you love them too much, they might not love you back. So I have to put some governors on this. So we hold that whole thing back. And that's why I call it the game of life, because nobody's going to be, I should frame this by saying that Henry James wrote a book in the early 1900s. And Mr. Rogers took some of his quotes, and the favorite quote that he took was, the three most important things that a human can do is, number one, be kind. And the second most important is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. And when you think about what that means, it's, wait a minute, that's a lot of kindness. And what if our people are mean? And how can I really handle that? But at the end of the day, when you think about who we are deeply, beyond the mind's trying to control and protect, we're love and kindness. Studies show that when you love and give and kind, the good bugs proliferate, the bad bugs disappear, oxytocin, longevity hormone goes, your telomeres lengthen. So many things happen in our body when we love or give and are kind. We live longer. You don't get cognitive decline when you age if you're positive thinking and giving and caring for others. The research is just overwhelming, right? So it's about that ability to be loving and giving and kind. Then we go, what if someone's mean? I'm not going to be a doormat and let them love me. But what I would suggest is just that having that awareness that no one has the power to take away your kindness. That's not for them to take away. That's what we allow them to do. And that's just a beautiful way of living where you're the sun and you just keep shining. Yeah. And nothing going to stop that sun from shining. And if it did, we'd all be dead. And we are little suns in here. And we think about that's what's happened. Now that we might get some clouds and some whatever, but the bottom line is I'm going to keep doing what I'm designed to do, which is find ways that are holding me back from being loving and kind and giving, even in the heat of battle, where I feel like I want to retreat and I want to judge and I want to withdraw. But finding ways to find that level of being, truth, silence, and then take action based on that. Where I'm feeling afflicted, respond with affection. You know what I mean? You see someone that's throwing darts at you emotionally and they're hurting you, of course it's going to hurt. And I'm going to quickly react by throwing more darts or turning my cheek and running away. Whatever I did then is going to hurt that other person even more. And the reality is the reason why they're throwing darts and being mean in the first place is because they were hurt. At some point in their life, they were hurt. And now their reaction is to hurt others and throw darts. So if we respond through the window of compassion and understanding of why they are the way they are, and respond from a place of love and compassion and eudaimonic without trying to manipulate them in any way, then they feel safe in that relationship. They feel safe enough to maybe let the delicate petals of their flower, who they really are, open and let something more real out. And now you begin to have heart-to-heart communication with each other, which is just not a thing in our culture. Everybody's communicating in a way to get everybody else to like them and approve of them, or I'm going to try to get you to make money, or it's transactional. It's all, none of it's just like I'm going to give and I don't have any expectation from you. That would be absurd in our culture, right? But that's actually how we evolve. That's actually who we are, because at the level of our quantum mechanics, we're fields that are infused. Those fields are infusing our physiology. And when our physiology forgets that it's part of the field, we start functioning as a kind of a holding on for dear life pattern of behavior, manipulating, jealous, needing. You don't have the ability to give love and be free and be altruistic.
Yes, and now we're going into exactly the type of topics that I like to call the far out but fascinating territory. So I love this, John. And I just want to circle back real quick to something you said. I love this quote, that to be kind. And I think it's also important for me, from my perspective, to underscore that being kind does not mean you're a doormat. And there's a difference between being kind and this being nice. Oh, you got to be nice. You got to be nice. No, you can be kind and still have your boundaries. You can be kind and not allow somebody else to wrong you or abuse you or hurt you again, but you can do it without throwing the darts at the same time while holding your sacred boundaries. And I think that's really important, because a lot of people mistake kindness for getting walked all over. That's not kindness, but you can be compassionate and loving and kind while still not self-abandoning. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because I hear it a lot of time from people when I talk with them about exactly that, this be kind. This is so crucial. Be loving, be compassionate. And then they're like, what? No. It doesn't mean you let yourself to get to be abused and used. No, to the contrary, actually. But yes, what you just spoke about, the field, and that's the part of your work that really lights me up, John. You also speak about biophotons, these light particles that all living organisms emit, and how practices like meditation and breath work can increase the coherence of light. And this actually sounds like science fiction, but it's emerging biophysics. And I think it's relevant to what we just talked about. Can you explain to us what biophotons are and why coherent light is fundamental to healing, and not only on a physical level, not only on an individual level, but actually a global level for humanity?
Yeah, I have to give you credit, Ariane. You have done your homework, and because you keep taking me in directions that very few interviews ever go. And this is maybe the most important subject, really, what you're talking about. And so there are photon emissions that come out of our DNA, thousands per minute. Most of them are incoherent. They're damaging because they're due to DNA damage and stress. And there's actually something called the bystander phenomenon, where they took one study where they took a monkey and they put it that was sick with cancer and radiated and dying basically, and they put a healthy monkey next to it, and within 48 hours, the healthy monkey started getting sick, and that was because of the damaging DNA, the photon emissions that were actually damaging the healthy monkey. And I think we all know when we walk into a room, if it's just a place you don't want to be, I think we maybe have that I shouldn't be here. This is probably bad idea, good idea to get out of here. So anyway, from the Ayurvedic perspective, the cause of disease was called pragya-prad, which means the mistake of the intellect, which means that they understood that, and this is quantum, well documented, everything comes from a field. Those fields become our physiology. That physiology forgets that it's a field. That's the cause of disease. Ayurveda and many physicists believe that field, those quantum fields, are in fact conscious, or our consciousness. So when our consciousness becomes matter or our physiology, and then the physiology forgets that it's imbued in consciousness, that's the cause of disease. So the goal would be to restore the memory of pure consciousness into every cell of your body. The idea is that your cells start to go rogue. They lose the memory of the whole. They start functioning as parts. They don't have that underlying field that connects everything as one. As we talked about, we're all underlying as one. And that's the goal of the game of life, is to keep digging closer and closer to the awareness of the fact that we all are one, a more spiritual experience. So if you're actually trying to restore the memory of consciousness and the physiology, you would want to go to the place where the field becomes physiology, or where the quantum fields become particles, right? So if I could find something that existed as both fields and as a particle together, I would be looking at something that exists at the junction point between consciousness and matter. And if I could live and bring my awareness at that junction point, it'd be like putting a lamp in a doorway, and it would shine into both rooms. And we would have awareness of both, which means game over, problem solved, right? That's the concept we're looking for. Ayurveda was all over that. And the one thing that they knew about was that these photon emissions, which come out of your DNA, are photons. And photons exist as particles of light or frequencies of light. So we have them coming out of our body all day long. Studies show that when they're coherent, they carry your thoughts. And they can even carry your intention, according to some studies. But how do they become coherent where all of them are damaging? Again, studies show that when you do yoga and breathe and meditate, or go into deep prayer and still your nervous system, or have a real deep relationship of resonance with the natural rhythms of nature, like in a forest, like our Native American ancestors did, the DNA damage was much less, and you were left with the coherent emissions. And those coherent emissions, because they're coherent, are more amenable to carrying thinking. And studies show that our nerves firing to one nerve to another nerve to make you think fast isn't fast enough. Has to be light. So they've got science now to prove that our thinking is carried on these frequencies or pathways of photons, light carrying information. Crazy. And that they could also carry our intention. And that gives us a really good mechanism for understanding how prayer would work in a distance healing sense. You pray for someone at a great distance, and there's studies behind that are mind-boggling that would make prayer the best drug on the planet, that Larry Dossey's work. But then there were studies show that it didn't work at all. And maybe the idea there is that the prayer had to have a level of silence and coherence in their DNA emissions, right? Their photon emissions, yeah.
And I would like to add something to this. I'm not religious. I was not brought up religious. My mom was a Protestant, but it was never imposed on us children. My parents always thought when we were old enough, my father was an atheist. He grew up a little boy during the Second World War. So logically, it also makes sense how that evolved for him. But that aside, they always thought we children get to choose. And I always learned from when I was very little, all the different cultures I was exposed to. Also, when I was for a few years in the German school system, they actually educated us on the major religions, which I thought was fantastic. So I am not part of any organized religion. It just does not draw me. But I am part of some spiritual communities, including Agape here in Los Angeles, which is a trans-denominational spiritual community. So it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter, where you come from, who you are. It's influenced by a lot of the master teachers, whether that's Yeshua and Joseph, known as Jesus the Christ, or Buddha, or Kuan Yin, or many others. But the point being, I'm so fascinated by a lot of this. They actually have a method of prayer. They call it the technology of prayer. And it's not prayer in supplication. Please, dear God, universe, spirit, do this, get me this, where you're actually also in a state of, I don't have this, please give this to me. I am in a state of lack, or whoever I'm praying for is in a state of lack. So that's also what you put forth, what you put out. But instead, it is a prayer that moves through gratitude for everything that is, acknowledging that there is only one, right? Everything is God. And then also, basically, it is speaking into coherence what you are praying for, acknowledging that that's how it is, and it is already done, and then releasing it. So that I find an incredibly powerful form of prayer. And I want to share a little anecdote. I actually yesterday went to the service at Agape, hadn't been in a while. When I walked out, there's always the opportunity to pray with licensed practitioners. And I decided, yes, I'm going to pray. I twisted my knee in a really bad way, just getting up on my seat. I was like, oh, darn it. So when I sat down and the wonderful practitioner, she asked me, what would I like to pray for? I was like, okay, today for myself, and I actually told her about my knee. She prayed. I got up from that chair. I thought I'd be limping around for days. My knee was fine. Anyways, just a little anecdote. So I wanted to add that. So I think it's also what is put into the prayer, right? When we're come from a place of supplication, which means from a place of lack, that may have a great influence as well.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's where intention comes to play, because when you meditate and you transcend your thinking, which is the goal of meditation, you find yourself in that place between field and physiology. And you're in that gap between the field and physiology. So Ayurveda was really all about understanding these windows that give us access to the junction between field and physiology, or consciousness and matter, and bringing your attention there and having an intention like healed or whatever. The intention is going to be carried by these frequencies of light. We have good science to back up. So that's how prayer would work for yourself, or distance healing would work for others. But Ayurveda was like, there's also the sunrise, which is the gap between night and day, the sunset, the solstices, the equinox, the gap between your breath. Pranayama is breath, and ayam means to pause or extend or hold your breath. So the research on breath retention from the free diver work was unbelievable. The gap between the mantra, when you say a mantra, which is a prayer basically, it's not the prayer, it's the slipping into the beyond thoughts while you're in the prayer, where you're in that non-thinking state, but you have an intention to heal a friend or yourself or whatever. That's what happens. And the mechanism, to take it one step further with how this really all works, is through something called quantum entanglement, which Einstein coined the phrase, but which meant that if you were observing a photon particle and that was entangled with another particle that could be in another galaxy, if I observed this photon, that photon would change its spin instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. Einstein knew this was a thing, but he didn't understand it, so he called it spooky action at a distance. That's what he called it. He didn't know what it was. Didn't want to go there because nothing could go faster than the speed of light. Except that's what quantum computing is today. Quantum computing is harnessing quantum entanglement, where, like cybersecurity on your computers is now, very soon will be in your computer, where if someone hacks into your computer, the photons on your computer and that computer are entangled. So as soon as someone looks at and observes that photon, it'll instantly change the spin of a photon in your computer and send an alert and lock your computer down. That is not distance future of the use of quantum computing or quantum entanglement. So when you look at that from a Vedic perspective, now I am in a meditation or a yoga, or breathing state or prayer state, or just completely entrained with nature and the silence of nature, thin that veil between the physical, spiritual, the game of life. We're working on that. But as you get to do that, you begin to have a level of awareness of the field. And those particles, because they're in your body, are going to be entangled with the particles in your body that are particle versus field. So you have photons in your body that are for frequencies, and there's photons in your body that are particles. So if you observe and keep dipping the cloth in the dye of your own consciousness, which is field or frequency based, it will instantaneously, through quantum entanglement, change the spin from particle to field in the parts of your physiology that became more dense, more particular, and started losing the connection to the whole and started functioning as parts versus whole. And that's the mechanism for quantum healing. That is what quantum healing is. And that's the beauty of the understanding of it. And that's why when we meditate or close our eyes for prayer, just trying to distill your nervous system and try to feel an inner silence inside of your body. And if you can begin to just feel that silent space, see if you can begin to perceive that silent presence around your body, because that silent field is everywhere. And you just begin to start to, whether you're in nature and wherever you are, just make that a practice, because that was the original point of meditation, was to give us an experience of the silence of nature in a very busy, hustling, bustling city, maybe an ancient civilization. Imagine, like, you're a hunter-gatherer coming to a civilization for the first time. What a gross place it would have been, how smelly, and people and stealing, and you lived in this beautiful native culture and trained with those rhythms, and then you come here. Somebody figured out, if you close your eyes, you can grab that silence and have it wherever, on demand, whenever you want. And that's really what we've lost in our culture, is this crazy overstimulation. We have no idea about the inner silence that's waiting for us to access.
And I want to take what you said before even a step further. When you spoke about quantum healing, that's at the base of quantum healing. I would say that's also the basis for what we call magic, right? I had another guest on the podcast, Dean Radin. He is phenomenal. He has books out where he talks about that principle and how when we are connected with the field, we can affect consciousness. And if you want to take it even further, if you think about enlightened beings or teachers, let's take Jesus Christ just as a thought experiment. When you are in such coherence with the field, it rearranges itself. You rearrange around it. So the miracles that he performed, what if that is a result of being in absolute coherence with the field? And yeah, if you think about everything you said, you mentioned this beautiful person who comes from a native culture comes into the city and the noise and the this and that. You look at our modern world, everything we're bombarded with, and that takes us out of this coherence. My writer's mind can't help but think that there is an absolute purpose to that as well.
When you talk about magic, you're talking about placebo, right? And placebo's effect is exactly, people somehow stumble upon this aligning of the field in their physiology, and magical things happen. Studies where people get knee surgeries, and one study showed that one group they all had knee pain, chronic knee pain. One group didn't get a knee surgery at all, but they were put under, they woke up and they didn't get anything. One just got their knee cleaned out, and the other one actually got the surgery. And then they just sent them on their way. And 2 years later, they checked them out. And every one of them, all three groups had the exact same results, 85% improvement. And they never knew, the ones that didn't get the surgery never knew that they didn't get the surgery until 2 years later. There's study after study, like even when they approve a Western drug, those drugs only have to outperform the placebo effect one time in one trial to be approved as a drug, because the placebo is so powerful.
Yes.
We don't try to harness that. We just try to get the drug to beat it, instead of trying to figure out how do we harness this incredible thing that can be as much as 80% effective, called the placebo.
It's ridiculous. When people talk about the placebo effect, they talk about it as if that diminishes it. But if our consciousness can reorganize matter at the quantum level, then the placebo effect may actually be the most powerful healing modality we have. And to call the one thing real healing and that, the placebo effect, as if it's something weird, is just, it boggles my mind. And it opens up the question whether all healing is ultimately consciousness expressing through biology.
I think that's if we take what you just said and go back to the fact that a plant, your broccoli, has a natural microbiome, and that combination creates a level of intelligence. And that intelligence is what feeds our bugs, which is our intelligence. And so when you begin to look at, okay, these bugs, I can't even see them, and they're actually governing the entire show. And just think about, we now know this whole idea of psychobiotics, where the more that you pray and care for others and love and are more altruistic in your life, it changes your microbiome. And that means that your microbiome is also evolving. This bug's been around for 3 billion years. It's not like they're just sitting there doing the same bug thing. They multiply every 10 minutes. They have been evolving too. So we can create an environment to make available a level of evolution for this species by actually engaging in the behaviors that were talked about thousands of years ago, which is to be sattvic, to be loving and giving and kind for no reason, not to be rajasic, which would only get happy when something good happens, where it's all based on what's happening. It was to actually engage in those sattvic, loving, giving, kind, altruistic behaviors, and that changes the evolutionary pathway. Our microbes begin to change in that environment, which means our brain chemistry begins to change in that environment. And we then begin to start to have the ability to heal and thin that veil between the physical and spiritual, become more intuitive, and to realize that the other 90% of our brain chemistry can actually begin to be something that we have the ability to harness and take and have access to, which most of us don't. It's really quite fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating, John. And to button this really beautiful conversation up, and I love the depth, everything that we've touched upon, and it's literally just the surface of the iceberg. When we look, I always like to make things practical for listeners, and especially touching upon what we just talked about. We have so many different things that are on us daily, whether it's toxins and whether these toxins are chemical or they're in the ether. We look at the type of times we're in where everything seems very intense socially, politically, especially here in the US. There's such a great division that's palpable, especially when you look into social media or the news. And no matter what side of the conversation you find yourself at, towards the right or the left or wherever on the spectrum. So someone who's listening to this conversation and they're inspired and they want to begin integrating Ayurvedic wisdom in their life, but they're also navigating this modern complexity, right? And then also demanding jobs, family, travel, stress, then all of these toxins on top of that I just mentioned. What are some, maybe 3 non-negotiable daily practices you would recommend as foundational? What would give somebody that's at the beginning of this journey the most leverage for the least effort?
Yeah, for sure. I think the simple thing is to start your day with some entrainment of your own inner and outer silence. I think that's the key. Call it a prayer, call it meditation, call it whatever you want. If you can sit outside or in your house, doesn't matter, but just close your eyes and try to establish a relationship with that silent witness, which is inside of us and all around us. That'd be number 1. Number 2 is your diaphragm. It is dysfunctional for 91% of athletes, which makes none of us in having a functional diaphragm, which is the number 1 pump of your entire lymphatic system. So we all have to learn how to breathe. And I would highly recommend doing some very simple diaphragmatic, what I call calisthenics, or flossing your diaphragm. I wrote an article called The Best Diaphragmatic Exercises. And they're just simple exercises where you take your arms up like this, and now fill your belly with your nose, breathing in. Now fill your chest. Then go your upper chest. And as you go to the upper chest, reach for the sky as high as you can reach and sip as much air as you possibly can. Make it into a maximum inspiratory breathing technique, and then come back down. So the idea is you fill your belly all the way, your chest all the way, upper chest all the way, reach, and then the diaphragm is going down, rib cage is going up, and you're beginning to break the scar tissue up between your rib cage and your diaphragm. And studies show that just that has been shown to reverse heartburn, GERD, reflux, indigestion, lower your blood pressure, and clean out the brain lymphatic system, and help you sleep better, and so much more. And that's hard science, simply by strengthening your diaphragm. So that's a big missing piece in our culture. People just think, I'm just going to do some pranayama, but if your rib cage is all tight and rigid and your diaphragm stuck together with it, the pranayama doesn't work that well. So we have to get it opened up first. That would be the first thing. And then I'd probably say the final thing is making, if it's possible, I know it's not cultural, but if it's possible to make your biggest meal of the day in the middle of the day, not late at night. And you can have a breakfast and a lunch and a light supper, but try to make lunch the biggest meal of the day, because that has been shown to be the time when your digestive clocks turn on. And after you eat a big meal, don't go sit on the couch and watch a movie. At the very least, stand up and march in front of the TV while you got the clicker in your hand trying to find something to watch. March for 15 minutes and then sit down. But don't eat a big meal and then go sit on a couch and watch a movie. It's just like devastating for your arterial lining and your metabolic health. So those are three like super simple things.
Excellent, John. Thank you. And this podcast is called Superhumanized because I believe we're at the edge of a profound evolutionary leap. And not through technology alone, but through the integration of ancient wisdom, modern science, and also expanded consciousness. And you've dedicated over 40 years of your life to this integration. When you look at the trajectory of human health, John, and the potential, what gives you the most hope? Where do you see us heading if we get this right?
I think where I see a lot of hope is in, I'm not a big fan of social media and what it's done to this culture, but I really love what it's done blowing up Western medicine and creating a whole new window and door for people to take the reins into their own hands and call it biohacking. Ayurveda, I look at it as more the original biohack. They had a whole longevity science, and now we're seeing science to back it up. I think that gives me hope that people are now talking about living to 100 or 180 or whatever, and they're starting to see that there's science now of really moving strongly in that direction. So I think that really gives me a lot of hope. I hope that also includes not just doing it from the outside in, but doing it from the inside out, the old-fashioned way, realizing that we have to explore our own inner space with our own mind, not with a drug or with anything else, which maybe you could do a little bit of that, but the point is that we have such an incredible potential just in this human body that we don't look at. We're always looking for something to do it for me, a pill or a powder or this or that, but really just learning how to still your nervous system, get out in nature and train with those rhythms and give yourself permission to experience the subtle. The circadian rhythms, right? Birds fly south, whales migrate. We can't see them.
Yeah.
But we have them inside of us as well. We can learn to feel them. And I think if you watch what you crave in the winter versus the spring or the summer, you probably go, oh, what's that about? I really want those warm soups. Those are little simple examples of us. We are circadian beings, and we need to learn to live like them. Because when you're going downstream with the river, it's peaceful. And when it's peaceful, you have more calm. More calm means more self-awareness. More self-awareness means we can begin to explore the potential of that inner space, which is like unlimited, as you talked about in your podcast all the time.
Yes, John. And I'm so grateful this conversation has been everything and more that I hoped it would be. You've given us such a rich tapestry, from the practical wisdom to seasonal eating, the cycles, and the frontiers of quantum biology and consciousness. And what strikes me most is how you've managed to hold both the rigor of science and the mystery of consciousness together without either of them collapsing into the other. And that's a rare gift. For everyone who's listening, I highly encourage you to explore John's work further. Visit your website is alifespa.com.
Yeah.
Yes, and you'll find a treasure trove of free resources and articles and videos and courses, and also check out his books. We touched upon some of them: Eat Wheat, Body, Mind, and Sport, and the 3-Season Diet. And if you're hungry for more of these conversations, then I also really recommend to subscribe to John's podcast, Ayurveda Meets Modern Science. We'll also put all of the links into the show notes. And John, I'm so grateful for all the work you do for the world, and grateful for sharing your wisdom with our superhumanized community today. And to everyone listening, remember, when we heal one, we help heal all. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious, and keep elevating. Thank you, John, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ariane.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.